Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 21st of July 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, but behind the technical desk, is Nick Green. Well, the weather here in Plymouth, pretty sunny at the moment, a few clouds around. I'm getting similar reports across the country. North of the border, I think it's a bit mixed. I think we'll leave it there. Well, what is happening in the UK? What's happening in the world? Serious things. We're going to start off by a report on the Ben Fellows Ken Clarke court case, which is continuing today in London. Now, the BBC and most of the mainstream press have picked up on this story. We've gone for the Mail here. Child actor invented claims he had been groped by Tory MP Ken Clarke during undercover investigation. It says that Ben Fellows alleged he was groped by former Chancellor of the Exchequer. He claimed it was while he was working working undercover for ITV's Cook Report in 1994. And he gave a statement to the police probing historical child abuse at Westminster. But now he is accused of fabricating claims and is on trial at the Old Bailey. So this is very, very heavy stuff. He goes on to say that he alleged that the former Chancellor of the Exchequer plied him with alcohol and carried out the sexual assault in the office of a lobbyist while he was working undercover for ITV's Cook Report in 1994. And then, just to re-emphasise, but it's Fellows himself that's appeared at the Old Bailey, accused of perverting the course of justice after making allegedly false claims. That's the grammatical error of the Mail there, not the UK column, in relation to Mr. Clarke. So very serious business indeed. Of course, we're not allowed to talk in too much detail because the case is progressing. But what we can say is that from the time Ben Fellows reported his story to the police, it was rapidly clear the police were not acting. And of course, Ben Fellows himself alleges that the police were particularly brutal in the way that they broke into his family's house and harassed his parents. We'll wait and see whether more comes out on that in the report. Excuse me. Let's have a look at how local papers deal with this. Of course, the Nottingham Post, extremely interested. Assault claims against Ken Clarke were fantasy. Here's Old Bailey. It's an interesting headline. Of course, other mainstream papers have used the same word, fantasy. It brought into my mind recollections of the judge in the court case of Melanie Shaw when he said that Operation Daybreak in Nottingham was a conspiracy theory. Well, what did the Nottingham Post want to say? They were very keen to point out that Mr. Clarke has represented Rushcliffe in Nottinghamshire as a Conservative MP since 1970. He was interviewed apparently, but detectives took no further action and shifted their investigation to the defendant, Ben Fellows. Well, of course, this is a fascinating situation with many other victims. We've seen that once they've come forward to report their stories of abuse to the police, miraculously, the British police seem to turn on them. And of course, this is a very interesting subject for the UK column itself, because having gone into a local police station in Plymouth some years ago to report the physical abuse of a young baby in South Wales at the hands of South Wales Social Services, we ended up with a Plymouth policeman shouting at us at the top of his voice to get out of his interview room. And of course, this instantly made us question, why would Devon and Cornwall police be so frightened of members of the public reporting child abuse? And indeed, why would this Devon and Cornwall officer become so aggressive? And of course, Ben Fellows has consistently said that the attitude of the police when he made his report was not caring and sympathetic, but became increasingly brutal. Well, where does this take the mainstream press? Well, not very far. UK columns always got a different approach. So we thought we'd have a little focus on our illustrious Prime Minister, David Cameron. And we'd like to thank the Financial Times for an article of some years ago, which said this: Cameron, the consummate spin doctor. And this article started to delve into David Cameron's career with Carlton TV as head of communications, and it raises some very interesting points. Why should we be interested in Carlton TV? Well, stay with us, because we'll take you through a little journey on this subject. Well, this was a key part of the article. It said Mr. Cameron's Carlton career, his only job outside politics, began in September 1994 when he was 27. The former special advisor had pulled strings to land the post. Annabel Astor, his future mother-in-law, persuaded Mr. Green from Carlton to take on a man with no corporate PR or investor relations experience. Well, that's quite interesting. But what we then learn from this very good article from the Financial Times is that in a series of run-ins with financial journalists, Mr. Cameron developed a reputation for arrogance, evasiveness, and in one case, alleged mendacity that dogged him during his attempt to become Tory leader in 2005 and may resurface during the imminent general election. Now, this was written back in 2010, of course. So something going on at Carlton TV. If you research this subject on the internet, a simple Google search, David Cameron Carlton TV, raises a number of entries where people are clearly questioning Cameron's relationship with this company. And of course, what is a key part of the questions raised is his relationship with tapes produced by the Cook Report and held at one stage by Carlton. So we can simply say here, internet awash with questions regarding David Cameron's role in the Cook Report tapes at Carlton TV. How can we have a look at this in a slightly simpler way? Well, we thought it was appropriate to do a UK column network diagram. So let's have a look at that. We should have it on screen. Here we are. Cash for questions and dirty deeds in the media. So let's go back to the Cook Report taking place between 1987 and 1998, produced by Central TV for ITV. And of course, Ben Fellows is alleging that he was part of the secret Cook Report, which was effectively conducting a sting operation on politicians in Westminster. So bear that in mind as we have a little look at how this particular investigation by the Cook Report developed. Now, what sort of thing were they doing? Well, they were investigating serious criminal activity, not only in Britain but worldwide. And the programme rapidly became very popular with audiences, and we understand that the audience level peaked at some 12 million viewers. In 1994, the Cook Report worked with the Guardian newspaper on MPs' cash for questions. And the televised Cook Report for Cash for Questions was strangely shelved. And in fact, it was the only documentary out of 130 that the Cook Report made that was cancelled in this way. The moment it was cancelled, the Guardian newspaper continued alone and ultimately ran the Cash for Questions story in October 1994, alleging Ian Greer had bribed 2 MPs. Now, this is the point at which it gets very interesting, because journalists subsequently investigated the Guardian work on that Cash for Questions story, and over a number of years their well-documented research using published reports, interviews and indeed court papers said that the whole of the Guardian story over Cash for Questions was a scam, and it was a calculated scam that had been designed to oust from power the then Conservative government of Prime Minister John Major. So if we put the key website in the centre of the screen, we would encourage viewers and listeners to go and have a look at guardianlies.com, where in a very simple website there is a great deal of factual documentary and other evidence which in our mind clearly shows that something untoward was going on in the way the Guardian newspaper, and indeed journalists working for the Guardian at that time, had ramped up and effectively claimed prizes for their work in exposing the so-called Cash for Questions story. So that is the background against which, of course, the Ben Fellows trial is now taking place, because Ben Fellows is saying that as a very young man, he was taking part as part of that deep undercover Cook reporting, which, as we can now see, was not only looking at the type of MPs that were in Parliament, but just what activities they were getting up to with regard to taking money in order to pose questions. We will try and report on this further, but do have a look at that website, and I think many of you will be very, very surprised to see the information and research presented. Well, we're going to say, whatever we think of the Ben Fellows Ken Clarke trial, let us remember that the subject of child abuse, particularly when it involves those in positions of power, is a very, very serious matter indeed. And as just one example, we'd like to remind you of the Mirror reporting on this story of a missing boy who was thought to have been murdered by a VIP paedophile ring, and subsequently his disappearance and murder covered up. And this is 15-year-old Martin Allen, who vanished in London in 1979 and was last seen boarding a tube train at King's Cross Station. Now, this particular incident has featured in the recent Australian Channel 9 60 Minutes documentary on paedophilia in Westminster and around British politicians. And of course, one of the key things that this documentary has claimed is that senior police officers, senior British police officers, halted investigations into paedophilia and serious child abuse in order to protect very powerful people. And by that, we mean members of the political elite in Westminster and indeed the establishment. And I will say from our own work over now several years trying to help survivors of child abuse, the common theme with those coming forward to the UK column is always that when they go for help to the authorities, to local authorities, charities, they go to the police, they are met with a wall of callous indifference. And more child abuse survivors are now saying that actually it was the authorities that claim they're there to protect the children who have indeed been helping to abuse them, or at least covering up that abuse. Well, our comments over recent days about what's been happening with the subject of child abuse led to us receiving an email this morning, and I thought the text was so interesting we would read it out. This is the message as received. It says, NSPCC. I did temporary work there in the early 2000s and was distressed to see how they treated Childline employees, who were mainly women of colour, who were poorly paid and not trained as far as I know, despite doing a harrowing job. I noticed in a centre in Manchester an appeal for Childline volunteers for NSPCC. It is outrageous and irresponsible for people not to be paid for this work. I have no idea if they check on applicants or train them. Certainly when I worked there, NSPCC had very swanky offices between Liverpool Street and Spitalfields, and a state-of-the-art IT system that coordinated all resources. It was just after Victoria Climbier's case, and the department I worked in was busy writing guidelines for social workers, etc. My boss commuted from Stalybridge to London every week, and so must have been on a fair salary. I note Peter Wanless is on over £160,000 per annum, according to the 2013-14 accounts, as opposed to people at the sharp end getting nothing. Clearly a lucrative business, but unclear what happens to children who ring in. Now, we've just read that text as it's been sent in to us, and we're going to say that, of course, it raises a lot of interesting questions about who is paid and who is not. But the minimum we can say is it appears to be yet another member of the public who has got some serious concerns about how the child protection system in UK does or indeed does not work. Well, just a quick advert for the UK column. If you're new to UK column news, or perhaps you haven't visited the UK column website yet, please do. We are promoting this particular article at the moment because as we start to see the power of the European Union unleashing its hand in UK, there is a requirement to explain exactly how this subversive European work is taking place. So I encourage you to have a look at Empire Building Under the Radar, how Europe uses its External Action Service. Well, we'll also say to you that tomorrow, because we're not able to do a news programme, we're going to be showing a video interview that I conducted a few days ago with Ian Puddick. And Ian, of course, is the London plumber who suffered an incredibly harassing and bullying action by City of London police, which used anti-terrorist units and cost them between £1.5 and £3 million simply to silence him because he spoke out about an affair that his wife had with a senior member of a prestigious London company. This is part of the BBC News report. Web revenge husband Ian Puddick cleared, and the reason we're using this as our advert is that according to Ian Puddick, BBC Home Affairs editor Geaton Portal simply failed to report the true facts from the trial and therefore really distorted the story, taking public attention off the gross misappropriation of police money and units as they progress the case against Ian Puddick. So if you can join us at 1 o'clock tomorrow, that should be played out live via the UK column live stream. Well, we've just mentioned the police, and what better man to call up on screen than Bernard Hogan Howe. And here we are, Metropolitan Police. It's now been decided that all new police constables must be able to speak a second language from today. Recruits will need to speak English and one of 14 designated languages to join the country's biggest force. Now, we think that this is an absolutely planned, calculated and deeply cynical breakup of the UK. London has always been designated to be a city region by the European Union, no longer to be our capital, but to be a city region. And of course, by bringing in language restrictions, what is clearly going to happen very quickly is that we're going to have the British capital policed by policemen and women whose background is from overseas, predominantly Eastern Europe. And of course, that means that they have no national loyalty or indeed loyalty to the British community. We'll qualify that statement by saying, as we always do, that of course these are people already in Britain who are being cynically used by David Cameron's Conservative government to help break up the Union. Where does this ideology come from? Well, perhaps we get a clue from Sarah Thornton, former Chief of Thames Valley Police, now heading up the National Police Chiefs Committee, and she's been waxing lyrical on reimagining policing. And her speech is now available on the internet, but we thought it would be interesting to have a little look. So here we are. She states this lecture is about policing, but I think it has a wider application. public service reform was at the heart of Blair's government ambition and the Prime Minister's delivery unit. And she's saying, of course, that unit had a central role. It's been fashionable to knock Sir Michael Barber's deliverology, but as I've thought about this lecture, I have been struck by the absence of any one big idea about transformation across government. Nudge, big society and what works have been talked up, but have not yet taken off. I have been involved with the chief of the Defence Staff Strategy Forum and Her Majesty's Court Service Transformation Steering Group. Both are grappling with very similar issues, looking to technology innovators for inspiration. So this is remarkable language by a woman who is supposed to be policing Britain. She's clearly unable to do that because she left Thames Valley Police with that police force having been publicly shown to have neglected and failed to protect vulnerable young female child abuse victims, and of course many members of the public saying that Thames Valley Police absolute disgrace under the hand of this woman. And the reason we suspect that she can't police is because she's too busy with a political agenda, which obviously includes nudging big society, transformation of Britain, and she's even now been elevated to work with Chief of the Defence Staff Strategy Forum. So we would like to ask the British government, and indeed anybody else who's prepared to follow up on the question, just what is this woman up to? But note her language, because of course Sarah Thornton is a senior Common Purpose graduate. She's been chosen as a future leader, and therefore we can imagine that her agenda is very much the Common Purpose agenda, which is to break down the British nation state and to leave us at the mercy of the European Union. UK Column has been warning on this subject. If we go back to 2007, a very early edition of our newspaper was actually warning about this, police fall victim on Common Purpose. And we were pointing out that Devon and Cornwall police officers who had received Common Purpose training were then starting to wax lyrical about visions. And this is what we said in the paragraph. Devon and Cornwall police haven't even got the cash for enough computers for their officers to do their jobs, nor can they now afford to run the necessary unmarked police cars, yet they do have enough money for officers to change the world. Following some £57,000 of taxpayers' money already squandered on the local police by the local police on Common Purpose training, Chief Inspector X, head of the custody unit, and his colleague Y, head of unit administration, were the latest policemen to be gushing Common Purpose cult speak. They are now both publicly committed to help instill a new culture in our own organisation, which would end up positively affecting the lives of millions of people. So here they are, no longer bothered with policing the streets of Plymouth and Devon and Cornwall. They are going to try and positively affect the lives of millions of people. And if we have a look at the second objective at the bottom, in an organisation that historically has not been overly keen on creativity, we're taking the lid off the box and providing a unique opportunity for our leaders to learn and truly lead. Not one word of policing. What we've got here is Common Purpose cult speak, that these future leaders are now going to transform Britain and indeed transform the world. Dangerous stuff, particularly in the hands of our senior police officers. Well, of course, British Prime Minister David Cameron is himself a Common Purpose guru. He's on the Common Purpose website as backing this organisation. And why should we be interested in our King David? Well, of course, he's up to more war overseas. Let's have a look at the report from the Independent. Here you have it. David Cameron extremism speech. The Prime Minister's Churchillian posturing over Syria is misguided. And essentially this is an article which starts off talking about tornadoes. But before we get on to that, let's just have a look at what's in the background. because the one nation, one United Kingdom, which is something David Cameron is consistently pushing now, is the great Cameron lie. Because while this man promotes unity, what he's actually doing is breaking up and destroying the United Kingdom. Just one example, the Herald Scotland here, casually saying, well, the SNP's telling the rest of UK, don't worry about independence, it's not really a threat, we're just breaking away. Well, UK Column was absolutely warning about this back in 2008. Again, an early edition of the paper from November of that year. EU Reform Treaty, and we're saying exactly what was planned, which is that Britain was slowly to be broken up into pieces. These are the European regions, Scotland to become independent, Wales to become independent, even Cornwall working with very dubious organisations inside the EU to gain independence, and ultimately the rest of England to be broken up in regions, significantly with London being designated a European city region, as I've already said, no longer the capital. And we added more because, of course, we've consistently said what this is. It's treason, but for the public, they need to think through this because the words are very poisonous but softly spoken. So how does David Cameron do it? Let's bring him on screen. Here's that article again. And we're going to give quite a bit of credit to Robert Fisk from The Independent because he's definitely started to think. Let's have a look at what he says. He says that the problem with the Prime Minister saying he's going to unleash war on ISIS in Syria is that our miserable 8 Tornado fighters on the jolly island of Cyprus won't make the slightest bit of difference to the bloody tragedy in Syria, let alone to ISIS. Now, how right this man is, because whilst the RAF has flown about 126 missions, I think the Americans are up to about 6,000. And of course, the problem is that since David Cameron and his Conservatives have been destroying British military capability, we have no aircraft left. And let's remind ourselves that Sky News recently reported that so bad is the maintenance on our Tornado fleet that missiles were simply dropping off on the runway. So perhaps we can say that David Cameron's one Tornado for one nation policy seems to be working extremely well. But this is not a humorous subject. At the end of the day, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people are dying as a result of unlawful wars created by David Cameron's British Conservatives. So if we dig into the article by Mr. Fisk, let's have a look at what he says. He says this: firstly, let us remember that we were going to bomb Assad's horrid army. Then we changed our mind. We would bomb the even more horrid ISIS army. Then when ISIS continued its expansion, war favouring guerrillas rather than air forces, we decided to bomb them even more than we'd been bombing them. It might have been better, needless to say, if we'd asked our Gulf Arab allies to stop sending weapons to the Syrian rebels who were giving them to the Islamists, who in turn we were bombing. So this man really now starting to work out that something untoward is going on. But this is not misguided. This is unlawful war unleashed by Prime Minister David Cameron on sovereign nation states while deliberately deceiving the British public as to what is going on. And I think it's appropriate to come back to the UK column's own reports because this was a report back in 2012 where our headline was, "Where shall I invade next? I've done Libya." And of course, this was comment on what had already been reported in the mainstream media. In his Downing Street flat, David Cameron is reported as joking to fellow Tories, "Where shall I invade next? I've done Libya." His chilling comment and crude indifference to human suffering tells us a great deal about this man. He is a political psychopath. He's not concerned for Britain, nor is he concerned for the safety of British troops. nor is he concerned for the millions of civilians that he's helped kill in Iraq, Afghanistan and Libya. And we were saying very clearly there that we've now got a Prime Minister, very dangerous, low empathy individual who thinks unleashing war on nation states is a little bit of a joke amongst his Tory chums. The truth of the matter has come out. We've already reported this, but let's look at the background again. This is the Levant report, a 2012 American Defense Intelligence Agency document. And what is it saying? That the West will facilitate, will help create the rise of an Islamic State in order to isolate the Syrian regime. And if we go into the body of that text, here it all is. They're going to create an Islamic State in order to get at Assad, and the details are all there for you to read. So if you haven't seen this document, do go online and have a look at it. But the aim of the joint American-US policy is actually to create the terrorist groups in order to attack and destabilize and remove President Assad from Syria. Of course, this is the David Cameron who lost a vote in Westminster when he tried to get a public mandate to attack Syria directly. So, Nick, we'll bring this one straight in. Let's remind ourselves here that, of course, President Obama is now clearly on video on the internet. What is he saying? Well, he's openly admitting that America is supporting the so-called terrorist groups, IS, ISIL, and yet at home, bottom right-hand corner, we've got a gentleman who was working for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary who's been absolutely vilified because he is also supporting ISIL. So the UK comment there is, what's the problem if Obama is supporting ISIL? Why can't Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary? Seems fair to us. Now, of course, we're not making light humour of what's happening here. What we are trying to do is show to the public that the British and American governments absolutely lying to their respective public over what they are doing with military forces behind our backs. Criminal activity by our own leaders. And once again, we're going to push very hard that it was Tory MP Brooks Newmark who was boasting of having been on the Syrian-Turkish border with General Idris of the Free Syrian Army at a time when that organisation was clearly stating it was working with terrorist groups such as Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. So we ask once again, Mr. Cameron, can you explain why your MP, former MP Brooks Newmark, was having meetings with those connected with the groups that you now claim are terrorist organisations? These are the two key areas. In his own words, Mr. Newmark said there are 150,000 Free Syrian Army fighters and 7,500 Jabhat al-Nusra fighters which have links with Al-Qaeda, and those people were actually linked to General Idris and the Free Syrian Army with whom Brooks Newmark was meeting. Well, again, the UK column has warned about what is really happening here. And if you haven't seen it, please go to the UK column website. Just do a search for Seeing Through the Clash of Civilization, and you will find this excellent article on psychological operations written by Patrick Henningsen, where he was very clearly stating and warning that the British and American public being cynically deceived by their own governments who are actively creating war overseas. Well, we'll end on the fact that UK column has set out to inform the public, and we get no pleasure from saying that we have consistently been warning the British public that the problems we're experiencing in UK today, be it with our own police or the NHS, social services, child abuse, the rundown of the military, wherever we look, the problem is created by our own government. And of course, these people are clearly not British. and they clearly do not hold traditional British values. Should we be surprised? We're just bringing the second one there, which is another front page that we did, in which we set out the details of how David Cameron, with his lookalike Nick Clegg, were going to conduct what we called the Quisling plan to change the whole culture of Britain. And I think there must be no doubt that that is exactly what we're seeing today, except we now have the added advantage of being able to see the true calibre of our British politicians and the true calibre of the British government, and that is men and women who as a minimum are prepared to cover up the abuse of children in order to protect their positions. But of course the reality is that at least some of those British politicians are paedophiles themselves. Thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder, no UK column news tomorrow, but we will be running what is an extremely interesting interview with Ian Puddick, having a look about his treatment by City of London police and subsequent erroneous reporting by the BBC. Thanks for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you again on Thursday. Bye-bye.